us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I have a printer at home that is hooked up to my computer. When I do work on my computer and I want to print it, it comes out on that printer. Over the last couple of months, the printer has decided that it knows how to print things better than I do. So it's been adding little borders and extra things and little blobs of toner. And so because it is under warranty, I said, hey, I'm going to throw it in the car and take it back to the store and see if they want to clean it out. So I did that, and I went to Fry's Electronics in San Jose, the superstore. It is also the Super Zoo on Saturday. And I went to the service area, and I explained my situation. And they handed me over to a guy named Rochester. Rochester was from Liberia, is from Liberia, has been in America only a little while, and this was his first job since he's been in America. And it turns out that he is a Christian. He was converted by Seventh-day Adventist missionaries who have gone to Liberia, and we had a chance to talk. Now, Peter, in 1 Peter 2, 9 through 10, has just finished telling us that there are those who see Christ as a stumbling block, who see Christ and choose disobedience over obedience. But then he starts with verse 9 by saying, but you, meaning Christians, are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and belonging to God. And you look at that and you say, I know my Bible a little bit. That seems like the exact same thing he said to Israel. And if you said that, you would be right. These are all taken from the Old Testament. And if there's one bit of Old Testament history you need to know, is the fact that Israel was given the law, Israel disobeyed the law, and Israel was taken captive by the Assyrians in 722 BC. Okay? It's good to know that date, because when you hear about Alexander the Great or the Persians doing things, it's good to put it into perspective. This group was never heard from again. In fact, it took a long time for archaeologists to figure out exactly where they were taken. But we think we know exactly where they were taken, and they assimilated with the Assyrians. They did not stay separate. Judea, the capital, was taken by the Babylonians in 586 BC. So that in 586 BC, the promised land was void of all Israelites. They had all been removed. The Babylonian exile was returned to Jerusalem 70 or so years later. Now the question is, why did God do this to his chosen people? God picked them, God called them. Chosen race, a royal priesthood, holy nation, belonging to God. But he removed them from the land because of their sin. God said, do this. They said, no, thank you, I'll do that. God said, do this. They said, no, thank you, I'll do that. God said, worship me. And they put idols in the temple. That was kind of the last straw. Idol in the temple. And so God brought in the Assyrians and the Babylonians and took them to a foreign land. And the Babylonian exile was delivered by God's grace. God felt 70 years was a long enough time out. And so he brought them back, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, those two books in the Bible, to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. What Peter is trying to say is that lost people are captive to their sins, just like the Israelites were captive in Babylon because of their sin. People out there who do not know Jesus Christ are actually in exile from God's grace, in exile from God's love, and are captive by their sins, but they can be delivered by God's grace.
Amen.
Now, if you're curious where those things are in the Old Testament, these are all the places chosen race, royal priesthood, holy nation, belonging to God are. And so you can see it's fairly extensive. These are phrases that God loved to talk about Israel. And now Peter is saying God is applying that to us. Bit of theology here. What does that mean for Israel? Some say, well, Israel's been booted out of God's will. They are gone. They have been replaced. That is not a popular view. The more popular view is that Israel has been purged and pruned. And that Christians do not replace Israel in God's plan. Israels are grafted in, like you graft branches onto trees. And that's talked about in Romans 11, how we are now not replacing Israel, but partakers of Israel's blessing. Israel, for all eternity, will be God's chosen people. Nobody, nothing can replace Israel. And if we ever elect a president who curses Israel, I will recommend you move to Canada. I do not want to live in a country where the leadership curses God's chosen people. So, I'm standing there across from Rochester, and I'm explaining what my printer does, and I'm showing him the demo pages that I brought. And he's listening intently, and then he pulls out reams of paper. I mean, the stuff I had to fill out to get this thing under warranty was amazing. And he kept apologizing. He was sorry that it took so long. He was sorry that he had to go make a copy. He was sorry that he had to go get a supervisor's password. And so I thought, this guy needs some grace. So I started talking about his religious practice and what it meant to him to be a born-again Christian in this country and in his job, and how that interface would work. And he began to ask me, well, how do I, in this world, being a pastor, how do I function at the mall, at the computer store, and on the highways? And I said, God doesn't care whether my printer works or not. God really doesn't. He is not up there going, darn that printer. No, he does not care whether your car won't start, or whether your house is too cold or too hot, or whether your printer doesn't work. These things are not on God's mind. What God is interested in is how I respond to my broken printer. He is much more interested in my attitude toward the broken printer and toward Rochester's supervisor who kept apologizing. God wants me to think about and be interested in the things that God thinks about and that God's interested in. You go, I can't think like God. That's true. I did not say think about things the way God thinks about them. But God has listed in the Bible that repeat over and over again, like love one another. So God is deeply interested in us loving one another. So if He's interested in that, perhaps I should be interested in that. So if we are a chosen race, what are we chosen to? I believe that if we are a chosen race, we are chosen for ministry. And you say, well, Steve has a ministry, he has a music ministry. Pastor Michael has a ministry, he has a preaching ministry. Ministry is any interface with another person. Whether it be opening a door, cooking a meal, sending a thank you note, making a phone call. If you are interfacing with somebody else with godly motivations, that is a ministry. And all of us need to be